When looking back at video game and home computer history, we hear a lot about companies like Commodore and Amstrad and Sinclair and Atari, but most of those companies were not doing the complete manufacture of their products. In fact, most of them relied on third parties in other places, especially East Asia. And for that reason, we're only really getting a part of the story of how these products came to market, and especially how they came to market at the price points that they came to the market, which allowed the massive penetration and the building of the modern digital world that we live in today. Our guest today is someone who can give us a bit more insight into how that process, what those relationships were like, in order to make sure that those products were basically under our Christmas trees as kids and also could just become part of our daily lives. Welcome to the show, Raymond Yap.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, excellent. Now, we start all of these conversations off the same way, and I'm going to ask you, so give us a little bit about your educational background.
Well, I guess that's quite a mixed, So history. Well, I got kicked out of school at high school. I was wasting my time in school, basically, and they asked me to leave, which I did. I obliged. I got a job as a trainee technician, and that, I guess, was my education. The trainee technician at the age of 16, 17 lasted for about 2 years. But okay. The training was not necessarily the technical element, but more the mentoring that I got, which was, I would call that my further education, that my manager at the time, as it were, opened my eyes to the world around and thinking and critically thinking about things and situations and people and so on. So I didn't have unfortunately, I unlike my grandchildren or my children, I'm not university educated, but I got mine through University of Life.
You got it the honest way.
Right.
Now, let's put this into a little bit of context. So where are you when you get kicked out of school? Because now you're in Hong Kong.
That's right. So I grew up in London, having been born in Jamaica, the West Indies. I left there when I was about 10 years old. Grew up there, left, went to England. When I entered the UK, I started my secondary school education, moved around from Swansea, Oxford, within a 1.5 year period, and eventually ended up in London, where I went to basically a comprehensive school that was an experiment of 3 schools amalgamated into one large comprehensive school. Very chaotic. I guess I lost my way in the education system, and I didn't participate. So eventually I got kicked out, or rather asked to leave.
Yes, you were bringing the average down.
Right.
Now, so when you say you became a trainee technician, which company were you at, and what kind of technician were you being trained to be?
So it wasn't necessarily, nothing to do with entering electronics, but I worked for a company. I can't remember. I'm trying to think of the name now, but they no longer exist. They were an import distribution company that sold a variety of products from electronics to optical instruments. So I was on the optical side. I was learning how to repair and calibrate binoculars, telescopes, microscopes, and so on.
Oh,
I did that for 2 years. Yeah.
And so you were basically quality insurance, I guess, or adjustments for imported goods?
No, I was on the repair side,
okay.
calibrating and repairing broken after service or broken stock items from the company. Yeah.
Okay. And so, did you get like a formal apprenticeship completion certificate or something, or were you just, okay, it's time to move to a different company?
No, I didn't. I just had the training, the technical training of that. But my takeaway from that was really the non product training that I got from my manager, the mentoring that I got from my manager at the time. That is what is the benefit that I took away with me from that employment. I then moved into various areas, retail sales, and eventually I did that for a couple of years and lost my way until so I got married young. I got married after I left my first job. I got married I was 18 when I got married. I met my wife. So we were married, and my wife at that time, her family had the company called WONG'S. When I married her, the company is very, very small. After about 3 years, I asked the company if there was an opening for me, and they said, "Yeah, come to Hong Kong and learn on the job in the factory in Hong Kong." So they had a few factories in Hong Kong manufacturing printed circuit boards. They were one of the biggest in Hong Kong, and they were doing simple electronic manufacturing toys at that time. So so I joined the company back in end of 75, and went on a couple of excursions to Singapore and then to the US to set up our first office in California. That was in early 76. I did that.
Quick question. Question before we get to the U.S. office, because we do need to talk about that. In 75, when you joined the company, Wang is, am I pronouncing it right? Wang or Wong?
Wong.
Wong. Thank you.
Yeah.
So when Wong is manufacturing this stuff, are they primarily they're not doing any design work as such, or are they also doing design work for the clients?
Very simple design work. We were a very basic electronic manufacturing. Came from the circuit board manufacturing. So if you imagine in the late 60s, the early version of printed circuit board were for radios, transistor radios, simple transistor radios that had single-sided printed circuit board, very simple board, maybe had 10, 15, 20 components on them. One-sided etched copper surface circuit board. But when I joined the company, they were just going into double-sided printed circuit board when I joined the company in 75. So a circuit board, and then from circuit board, basically the family consisted of brothers and two brothers-in-law. I was one of the youngest brother-in-law. And so the brothers, each brother came in and set up a different branch of the company. So the two brothers started off the circuit board manufacturing, and then a younger brother joined, and he started the assembly company where they were assembling simple toys and simple battery snaps. In those days, you had PP3 batteries? I can't remember now. Battery snaps. The simple keyboards for calculators was something that they were doing. Very, very basic clickers on a circuit board. Very simple. But most of the design, in going back to your question, most of the design at that time was done by the customer. We would do some tweaking of it. Yeah.
Okay. Now, was Wong then a Hong Kong-based company? Because obviously you met your wife in the UK,
In London. That's
so in
right.
London. So what was she just there because they had an outpost in London, or was it a company that was more based in London with manufacturing in Hong Kong?
All right. So basically, the headquarters and most of our manufacturing at that time was in Hong Kong. There was no presence in the UK or Europe. They had representative offices or reps, they call them, in the USA, but no office in the UK, in the USA when I joined. My wife, actually ex-wife, we finally separated, divorced 5 years ago. But
Oh, sorry to hear.
no, they well, life.
Yeah.
So no, they had no presence in the UK. She was there studying, getting away from the family and studying in the UK. That's it.
So you were her rebellious paramour who.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I was more the savior, and that's another topic.
Okay, we don't need to go there. Yeah. Okay, so they're manufacturing and getting the designs. So is Wong actively going out and going to companies that want to design stuff, trying to sell their service? Is it more an issue of the companies coming to them? How did those contacts even come about?
So, well, I can speak for both. It was a very different market in the USA. So during that time, in those days, actually, when I joined the company, we were just starting to do some manufacturing for Atari. We were actually doing the Atari TV game in Hong Kong, and a lot of their circuit board for their the control panel.
The Pong game.
Yeah. So we manufactured the circuit board, or we were one of the manufacturers of the circuit board. Eventually, we did make the panels, the control panel for Atari. In fact, we had a joint venture with Atari a few years later, joint manufacturing venture. But the difference between the market in the US and Hong Kong was the US was more mature in that during the 70s, the US were very, when it came to manufacturing or sourcing from abroad, the US were more adventurous, I would say, than your European counterparts. You know, if you offered an American company a 10%, 50% opportunity for 10, 15% savings, you know, they jump at it. Not so the Europeans at all. So in the days of when I joined, we had no European customers at all.
Oh wow.
We had just American customers.
Interesting. So now when you join, there's already some manufacturing for Atari. I'm guessing there's also manufacturing for a bunch of other kinds of products, not just computers and the like.
Right. So no, when I joined, we were still making the toys, but it was a few years afterwards, a couple of years afterwards, that we actually started manufacturing the console for Atari. But we were making the circuit boards, simple circuit boards for them. I think when I joined, by the time I joined, and we were doing. When I joined, we were basically doing toys and battery snap connectors.
Gotcha. Now so sorry, getting back to it. So you do a tour also of Singapore. Was Singapore already a manufacturing place for you guys? Did you already have facilities there, or was it just to see if that was an option?
No, we had some connections with Singaporean companies, major Singaporean companies, but we had very little business with them. So I went over there to explore the opportunity of business in Singapore. We had at that time no manufacturing in Singapore, although in later years we did establish a joint venture with Toshiba to manufacture circuit boards in Singapore several years later. So that lasted for several years. But apart from that, we had no other manufacturing in Singapore. Most of the manufacturing when I joined the company was all in Hong Kong at that time.
Gotcha. Real quick, could you move the microphone down just a little bit again?
Okay.
Thanks.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So when let's get back to opening up the office in the United States. And I need to ask just a weird question, but probably logistically important. Now, you are ethnically Chinese, but you, I believe, are third generation Jamaican or second generation Jamaican?
Second generation Chinese Jamaican.
Chinese Jamaican. Do you speak Mandarin or any other Chinese dialect at this point?
At this point, very little. In those days, none.
Okay.
I was what you call I still am a banana, actually.
Okay. I know where that one's going. Okay. So, okay. Just thought I'd ask whether or not that was any kind of hurdle towards doing business in Hong Kong, but I'm guessing Hong Kong wasn't a problem because everybody or a large portion of the population spoke English.
The English language level at that time when I joined the company was not too bad. I dealt mainly with our managers in the manufacturing side and clerical assistants, and most of them spoke reasonable English. In terms of customer base, I didn't need any of those languages because going to Singapore, they all spoke English. Going to America, they spoke American.
Like a proper Englishman, yes. They haven't spoken the language in years over there. Okay, so now you get the office is open in the States. And you go to the States for a while, right?
Well, I went to the States for about a month. The objective was to set up an office, which we did. We set it up actually in Costa Mesa in Orange County, Southern California. So I secured an office, secured an employee, a secretary. And during the time I was there, my other objective was to go out and visit potential customers, which is what I did. And that, I think I did that for about 5 or 6 weeks, living predominantly in California, but I did travel around a couple of times to the East Coast and Midwest to visit potential customers.
Now, in the pre-internet age, so we are talking 1976 here,
right? How
do you find out who the potential customers are? I mean, what does that process even look like?
Wow, that's a tough one. So the U.S. is somewhat easier because you had various directories that, and I wasn't pulling out obscure names out of the bag, as it were. It was some of the major players in electronics at the time: General Electric, Hewlett Packard, Apple. All the major names that still exist. Well, no, actually, some of them don't exist. But anyway, the major names at that time were the names that I was talking to. Different situation with the UK though, because at that time, one of my source of information was there was a directory called Compass, I think it was. So it listed the A to Z directory of most medium-sized companies. Of course, it didn't have the small companies, but I used that quite extensively. And I mean, in those days, companies like Acorn or Sinclair, of course, were not in those directories. But, through, as it were, a lot of contacts and engaging with different people, you eventually,
you network.
2 degrees of separation. Eventually, I mean, that's how I got to know Christopher Curry, and that's how I got to know of Acorn Computers and so on, through one person who knew somebody else, and then it went on from there.
Gotcha. Now, Hong Kong at that time still part of the British Commonwealth, a territory. Moving product from there to the UK and then from the UK into Europe, relatively simple.
Mm-hmm.
Were there any particular challenges that you had to deal with when trying to export, for example, to the United States?
No, the US is pretty straightforward. Very straightforward. For example, the basic thing was that, for example, you had to have UL certification for your manufacturing and your process, which we did.
What's UL?
Underwriters Laboratory certification. I think it was, especially in the electronic industry, it was a prerequisite for being able to supply to the electronic industry. So of course, we had that. In the UK, there was no such thing really, we did, in terms of exporting to the UK. We didn't really have any really big hurdles. The big hurdles were really connecting and engaging and building trust with potential clients, which took a long time actually. It took me 2 years of hard slog, knocking on doors to eventually get my first contract.
Really?
Yeah.
That's crazy. So, okay, now you're doing the boards. Yeah, you establish the office in the U.S. Now you're only there for a month and a half. Where do you go after establishing that office? Are you back in Hong Kong?
Right. So having completed my given task in the USA, I went back to Hong Kong, and within weeks I persuaded the family to allow me to go back. So I arrived in the UK, I think round about maybe June, July. June, July of 76. And I basically worked from home. So I was working using one of the bedrooms as an office when I started out, and did that for about a year and a half. Yeah.
Okay. Now, were you surprised by how much more difficult it was to build relationships in the UK?
I don't think I analyzed it in terms of difficulty. I guess I'm one of these eternal optimists that you see a ray of light at the end of the tunnel, and maybe I was too stupid to not to analyze it, but yes, I have a very upbeat attitude when it comes to doing things, that everything will work out, and I'm moving forward. But it did take a year and a half of slogging and marital strife that it did have a huge impact actually on personal relationship, especially during that very let's say gray period of time.
I can imagine. I mean, you're back in England. You're trying to make this work. It's a family business, so obviously there's some pressure, to prove something beyond just the numbers.
Yeah. So the pressure wasn't actually from the family back in Hong Kong. Actually, the pressure was from the daughter of the family that huge pressure from her. But I persevered.
Very good. Now, did Wong already have any clients in the UK at the time?
No, none at all.
None at all. And were you exclusively looking at UK clientele, or were you also looking to other European countries for potential clients?
Well, so during that time, of course, most of my activity was in the UK, but I was reaching out to potential clients in Europe, like Philips, for example. Philips was various Philips. You had Philips all over Austria. I went to Austria many times. Siemens in Germany. I didn't just concentrate on the UK. I did a lot of legwork in Germany, a little bit in France. The French I don't think they've changed, but the French are somewhat more difficult. And I won't say any more than that. The Germans were a little bit more receptive. So I ended up doing a couple of exhibitions in Germany during that time that I was there in the 2-year period. So not exclusive the UK. I was, as it were, networking and going to Europe to explore the potential.
Gotcha.
But never got any real business. Really, my first business actually was from the UK after almost 2 years.
And who was, or what was that first breakthrough?
I think so. There was a small amplifier company in the UK called WEM, W-E-M, a very small. So in those days you had Marshall, the guitar amplifier, and WEM was I think a second or third company. And after many months of conversation, I got a small order out of them to produce some modules for their amplifier. And I think that was my first. I can't remember which was my second, but probably so before Christopher created Acorn with Herman, he was involved with something called Science of Cambridge, which was something I think he had a joint ownership with Sir Clive Sinclair at that time. So we were, when I started working with Christopher, I think we were making a board for, I think they call him a hex keyboard, a very technical version of a computer. Didn't have the traditional alphanumeric QWERTY keyboard. And so I think that was the first product I made with Christopher, with Science of Cambridge. We made the circuit board, and then I think we did some assembly of that board. Because at that time, during that time, the electronic industry was moving. So they were making transistor radios. Sir Clive Sinclair was doing transistor radios. Then when I started in UK, they were well into making calculators. And so from calculators, you had then this more sophisticated, I think they called it MK14, I think it was, this computer that Science of Cambridge designed. And so when I started my relationship with Christopher Curry, we were making the circuit boards eventually, and some assemblies.
Now, I do have to ask, because obviously Wong is manufacturing for different companies around the world. when you guys get a contract to do a product like the MK14, and how much do you know as the person representing the company in the UK about other potentially similar products that Wong is already manufacturing, let's say for a company in the United States or so? Are you getting regular updates on all the different things being manufactured at the company? Or
no, I don't think we had a structure like that with communication, because my update was basically physically going. So in the first year, I don't think I went back to Hong Kong for any visits after 76. I think I only went back about a year and a half afterwards. And so my update, as it were, in terms of what we were doing and who we were doing it for, was based on a factory tour. I'd always do that. Whenever I went back to Hong Kong, I would do a frequent factory tour, see what we're doing, how we were doing it, which was very helpful in communicating and talking to people like Acorn when they were making their products.
Gotcha. Now and they're coming to you now when they're proposing these ideas, or they're saying, can you guys make this? Are they coming at you with a full-blown prototype? Are they coming at you with just a technical specification? I'm guessing there's various degrees of this from client to client, but what was a typical situation for these early, let's say, 78 through 80 type of deals?
Okay, so before the Acorn computer, basically everything was done by the client. They did all the design work, and we just, we did what you call manufacturing engineering. We checked over, made sure everything looked okay. There was no shorts in the circuits and so on and so forth. But most of the design was done by the customer. But when we got to the Acorn, when Acorn Computer started, they started as a consultancy company. I think they were consulting for these game machines.
The coin operated ones, or the
coin operated game machines. And during that time, I think they were simultaneously working on something called the Acorn Atom. So when I started talking to Acorn, so obviously I knew Christopher before Acorn Computer was created a year or two before, and so I came in early. And during the early design of the Acorn Atom, they said, "Well, we need a low-cost keyboard to go with this Acorn Atom that we're designing." So previous to that, several months previous to that, in one of my trips to the USA, I used to go to a lot of the electronic shows like the CES and various other shows. I went to one in Atlanta, I think it was, on the East Coast. Went to a few on the West Coast. And I remember meeting a guy that had this really cheap and nasty keyboard, really cheap and nasty. And I kept it in my library of information. And when Christopher and Herman said, we need a cheap keyboard, I said, aha, I have the answer. We can supply that. And so we sourced that. Actually, I took a trip with Herman to check out the keyboard manufacturer, the key top and the key switch mechanism. And they said, okay, yeah, you guys can supply and eventually manufacture the Atom. So the Atom initially came as a kit, a DIY kit, where the user, in those days, people were pretty enthusiastic, or well, a number of them, they were putting together their own computer. So they were soldering, all these components themselves. So we would ship the keyboard skeleton to Acorn, and they would then sell those as kits to their customers. But eventually, the market grew bigger, where most people then wanted fully assembled Atom. So we did the assembly of the Atom eventually in Hong Kong for Acorn.
Now, the keyboard manufacturer you're talking about was also an Asian provider, or was this an American manufacturer?
No, so this was it was an American company, interestingly enough, for this dirt cheap keyboard. That it served the purpose for the Acorn Atom. They wanted a really cheap keyboard, but the Acorn Atom was superseded eventually a couple of years later by the BBC Computer, where they needed a better quality keyboard. By that time, I had also done some research and found a Japanese key switch manufacturer that we then sourced and create and assembled the keyboard for the BBC Computer using the key switch from a Japanese company.
So this is really, everybody talks about globalized supply chains nowadays, but obviously here we are very early 80s or late 70s, and you're bringing these pieces in from all over the place to try to create a cost-effective version of this product. Now, with the BBC Micro, obviously you also still have chip manufacturing. Or you need chips for this thing to work, memory chips and so forth. Wong is not involved in that side of the business, I'm guessing.
No, we were not making semiconductors or transistors at all.
Okay. So were you involved in negotiating or arranging the sourcing of those, or was that done by the client?
So, no, most of it was done by us. With the BBC Computer, that was a more complex product, because the BBC Computer did have some custom designed products from, I think one of the company was called Ferranti, that they used a couple of semiconductors called UCLA. I can't remember what that stands for now. Uncommitted Logic Array, I think it was.
Okay.
Uncommitted logic array that was custom made for Acorn for the BBC Computer. But on the whole, we were sourcing. Acorn said these were the components that we needed, and we went out and say, okay, that could be supplied by National Semiconductor or Hitachi or whoever.
Interesting. Now, I gotta ask, from a financial standpoint, are you guys charging for an extra fee for the sourcing service, or is that just being wrapped up into the manufacturing cost?
It's wrapped up in the manufacturing.
Okay. So before you give an estimate to Acorn about how much this is going to cost, you first have to figure out if you have a supplier and all of this stuff.
Correct.
How, for example, on the Atom, the finished, and not the kit version, but the finished version, how long would it take you to be able to make those contacts, figure out if the stuff is supplyable, and to be able to even give a price estimate?
Oh, giving a price estimate would probably take, I don't know, a month or so. Quite extensive, because as well as the customer would give you a component list. We would then, our engineers would look at it and say, well, we've got a second source for this, and we'd put forward a second source request to the customer, and the customer would say yes or no. But
So when you say second source, for the listeners who don't know, second source is basically having a second manufacturer in case the first one can't make it.
An alternative. So the alternative is it's usually a cost. It's cost differentiation, and you generally you'd like to have a second source anyway, just in case. So it doesn't stop you from using the initial requested source, but it's always nice to have a second source standby. But also in terms of cost saving, sometimes, of course, having a second source, national semiconductor, maybe 10% more than Texas Instruments. So, can we use Texas Instrument, for example, or whatever?
Gotcha. Now, how does that work? Do you actually have a contract with the second source to be on standby in case they're needed? Do they know that they're the second source? How does that work?
No, usually, no. Usually, you negotiate a price and a quantity with them, and they'll give you a price and potential delivery dates. And I mean, it's manufacturing is a bit of a complex. It's not quite a black and white thing. You'd have your purchasing department, you have your product engineering department, mechanical engineering department. So a whole heap of different departments that come together to put together a product. So the buyers would be working with engineers and so on and so forth. So yeah.
Gotcha. It seems like a logistical tour de force to get something like this off the ground.
Yes. Oh, definitely. Yeah.
So you've got the sourcing of from your standpoint, your part of the job is you've hustled to make the contacts with potential clients.
Yeah.
They've told you what they want.
Yeah.
You've proven what Wong can do internally. You've sourced different items. You've figured out the logistics of when stuff can be delivered, and you come back. And so once you've gathered all this information, do you put together like a dossier for the client or a presentation of these are the timelines, these are the costs, this is what we're looking at?
I don't. It's an ongoing situation where once you present your quotation to the customer says yes or no, or you negotiate from there until you get a yes or no. And once you get the yes, it's just an ongoing process that you're having continuous dialogue with either the commercial or the engineering side of the customer, as well as our own engineering, purchasing, financial side of the company, and making sure that everyone. So I'm sitting in between everybody, and trying to smooth the waves, as it were. So it's the transfer of information from one to the other, and I'm in between and keeping everybody informed. We have a problem with this component, or we have a manufacturing problem. What can we do about it? It's by all means not plain sailing, because invariably there are problems, and there are times when engineers have to fly over from UK to Hong Kong. Christopher himself had to spend several weeks in Hong Kong when we first started to build the Acorn Atom. Building the tool for the Atom case, for example. He spent several weeks in Hong Kong, just making sure that happened and being satisfied that it was happening.
Interesting. So now I guess the coordination of all those elements, getting the product ready. Obviously, the client's also got a date by which it has to hit the shelves and everything else.
Yeah.
And now I got to turn on the lawyer side of me for just a moment. Okay. So the contracts for all of this stuff, must have been massive, especially because you're going across borders. If you're sourcing something from Japan or the United States through Hong Kong and so on and so forth. Who are the people who the contracts are made with. So your supplier for a keyboard from the States, is that a contract between the keyboard supplier and Wong? Or is somehow the UK client also involved in that contract?
So I don't know if you could call it the caveman days, but in my days, back in the days, I think things were simpler. The customer would issue a purchase order to us, and the purchase order gave specification, delivery dates, and price. So that's a purchase order. In terms of agreement, we in those days we never got into sending out a contract per se. The customer didn't do it. We didn't correspondingly do it to say, yeah, we accept your order. Of course, at the back of the purchase order, you'll have force majeure, things like, but it certainly wasn't, a several-page document. It was, part of the purchase document where, of course, force majeure, in one instance, one time, a ship sank, out of our control. What can we do? Well, claim your insurance.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, and I do also have to ask, because like you said, the first atoms were shipped out as DIY kits. Was the shift to putting together the whole unit a big change for Wong? I mean, was it a difficult transition?
No, actually. We had transitioned. Hong Kong, Hong Kong was a very flexible place in those days. I'll give you an example. So I wouldn't say that was us, but a typical example in Hong Kong during the late 70s and the early 80s, where you would have a manufacturer who was making fabric for denim jeans. And so he's a factory owner. He'd close it down, and, several weeks later, he's manufacturing transformers. How do you jump from making yards and yards of denim jeans material to going to making transformers? Well, it's a can-do attitude in those days that, unfortunately, I don't think exists anymore. And that's the attitude that I had also. There's no reason why we can't do it. Let's try. So from making simple toys to assembling this Acorn Atom, we convinced Acorn that it's just soldering at the end of the day. So
I hear you. Raymond, so now you've got this infrastructure. You've had experience now getting the sourcing of all the international elements down and so forth. Let's talk a little bit about the big project then that comes out after the Atom. You come into the Micro, the BBC Micro. So were you aware, when you get involved with the project, are you already aware that they've gotten the BBC contract? Is it before the BBC contract, when it's still a prototype? At what point do you get involved with that process?
Okay, so my involvement with the founders of the Acorn Computer Company basically started well before the BBC Computer ever was even thought about. So I guess the relationship must have been at least 3 or 4 years prior to the existence of the BBC Computer. So that put us in good stead to supply some of the main components to Acorn. So we started off supplying printed circuit boards, and then eventually making keyboards, supplying them with keyboards. Eventually, we were making the Atom itself, complete Atom, in Hong Kong, and shipping that to Acorn. But during the I guess the midlife element of the Atom computer, the BBC computer, began the birth, as it were. So we, as a contract manufacturer, were not involved in any of that process. So I'm not going to take any glory from that at all. We were not involved. We only got involved, having been involved with Acorn and the founders of Acorn for a number of years. We only got involved when it got to the stage that they were then talking about key elements of the computer. So the key elements, memory serves me right. Definitely, we started off with supplying the keyboard because of the nature of the BBC computer, i.e., it's a UK British product. It was deemed necessary that, at least in the early stages, that a major portion of the manufacturing was to be done in the UK, which happened. So, but basically, our involvement with that was that we still were the only supplier at that time. Maybe very later on, we may not have been the only supplier of keyboard, but we were the single source supplier for the keyboard, at least for the first several years. We were the supplier for the printed circuit board, so we would ship all of these to Acorn, that again then shipped to the manufacturer. So I think they had a manufacturer in Wales. I think it was a company called AB Electronics that were putting together the complete BBC computer for Acorn. But so they did that for a few years, and then the company became mature, the product became mature, and then eventually we started to manufacture the whole product in Hong Kong also. So we became a second source manufacturer for the complete computer eventually from Hong Kong.
Interesting. Now, the quantities that they were expecting to sell were obviously much larger than for the Atom. And did that pose any kind of difficulty for you, or did it change the nature of the beast in any way?
Not really. Not really. Such is the flexibility of most companies in Hong Kong. So at that time, that stage of the life of Hong Kong, we were still manufacturing predominantly in Hong Kong. Most of our manufacturing was in Hong Kong. At the high point, we were probably employing anything from 5,000 to 10,000 people in Hong Kong. To scale up the manufacturing wasn't a big problem. It scaled up from, 10, 15,000 to 30 to 50,000 per month. Eventually, the scaling up was not a problem.
Okay, and so now you've got this big fish on the line, and we talked already a little bit about your efforts to also get manufacturing assignments from mainland Europe, European companies as well. Yeah. And this is also a period when the market starts to consolidate. A lot of the smaller manufacturers like Dragon and so forth disappear from the market. Yeah. Because I found your name through an interview that you gave to one of the British publications at the time about your assessment, and it was a very accurate assessment. It was very prescient at the time about which manufacturers were going to survive and which ones weren't. How did that consolidation change your approach to finding assignments and as to what kind of assignments you were looking for?
Yeah. So it actually changed the landscape significantly because, leading up to that period of the growth of our company, we weren't simply just looking at simple manufacturing contracts. We were looking for, significant dollar value, unit item price. We weren't not looking for, $1, $2 manufacturing project. We were looking for significant numbers. They really didn't exist in Europe, didn't exist in the UK, to the extent that, they existed, but they existed for the major manufacturing brands like Siemens and, Siemens, I'm trying to Vodafone, all these companies were, had their own manufacturing, and they tended to be within Europe at that time. And so, most of these large brand companies, especially the Germans and the Germans and the French were large manufacturers of electronic products. They during that period of time that we were there, and I would, dare say, even well after I left the industry, the late 80s. Most manufacturing were done in Europe. Europe was a closed shop really for when it comes to contract manufacturing. Extremely nationalistic. To some extent, it still is actually. To some extent, it still is. Unlike the Americans. So, I guess as a company, we pivoted more than that. Not I, but the family that ran the company. We pivoted more to the U.S. market and Japan. So at that time, Japan was basically opening up to contract manufacturing abroad. So we were manufacturing for people like Dell, U.S. We were manufacturing for people like Toshiba. So those companies were more open to contract manufacturing abroad, whereas the European was pretty much a closed shop. So it did have an effect on, as it were, the revenue generation from Europe that I was responsible for. So our revenue basically dropped significantly after the demise of the Acorn computer or the BBC computer. But so, I mean, that was sort of 85, 86, and my life changed also. So I took sort of early retirement at the beginning of 87. And decided that I'd submit my resignation to the board, which I did at the beginning of 87. And I said basically goodbye to the industry and eventually emigrated to Canada.
Understood. Now, we're going to have to jump into that because your life did not remain boring, let's put it that way. But just real quick before we jump into that, around 84, 85, there's the first opening up of technology manufacturing in mainland China. Was that a factor at all for you guys? Was there any consideration of moving manufacturing to mainland China from Hong Kong?
No, I think it was a pretty much done deal. As a contract manufacturer, your customer base is always looking for the next saving in dollar terms. And so it was a natural evolution that, that's what, companies in Hong Kong and Taiwan did basically. When the world, Nixon and that diplomat Kissinger decided to welcome China into the world. companies started to look at. Well, I mean, the long thing was, yeah, okay, it's a huge potential market, 5-10 years down the road, but also in terms of business owners, it was a huge pool of low cost labor, which within a few years, many, if not most, of the large manufacturing group, not just electronics, large manufacturing group basically moved from China, to Taiwan or Hong Kong, and basically, moved into China, which was predominantly basically agriculture, farmers, really. You were teaching farmers how to assemble computers, basically. Yeah.
That's now. So, and one more step before we go to your move to Canada, the Acorn Electron.
Yeah.
Were you approached about manufacturing that device as well, since you already had the relationship?
Yeah, I for the life of me, I remember the Electron. I think the Electron. The life of the Electron began more or less around the period that I was beginning to leave the company. So my recollection of our contribution to the Electron, I don't remember, but the Electron was a birth, really. Looking at the future market, companies like Acorn says, can we produce a more compact, more economical consumer product, and so that was the birth of the Acorn, the Electron. But for the life of me, I don't remember our input on the Electron. I remember seeing the playing and touching the Acorn Electron, but for the life of me, I can't remember.
Not a problem.
To what extent we participated in that.
Gotcha. So now, you leave the company for a variety of reasons. Now, you move to Canada. Is Canada just the destination? You're going to figure out what you're going to do there, or do you already have a prospect when you move to Canada?
No, I mean, I worked and lived a pretty intensive 10 years in developing the WONG'S activities in Europe, from basically 2 years of slogging, my first 2 years of slogging of getting no business, knocking on doors and getting no business, and disheartening, but I persevered and eventually became a significant contribution to the group revenues. I'd always I was looking around even from the early 80s that I was going to retire early. That was always been my vision. Retire early and go and relax somewhere. So it wasn't that I was going to escape the business and do something else. I was just going to do nothing, which is what I did for many years. I went fishing for almost 15-20 years.
Nice.
But it caught up with me because during the time that I was in Vancouver in my retirement years, I still kept in touch with Christopher Curry. In fact, he's one of my board directors of my charity, and I was there in his home staying with him actually 6 weeks ago or whatever. So we kept in touch. So in those years we kind of collaborated on two projects that unfortunately, nothing, they fizzled out eventually, but they were, significant potential opportunities. But they didn't unfortunately pan out.
And so after fishing for a while, you're still keeping an eye on the technology. Obviously, the home computer, microcomputer thing evolves, and what ends up pulling you back in to active?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. So in that time, I was keeping in touch with Christopher, and during that time, I think it was about 94, 95, 96, something like that, when Christopher was working on Mondex. So Mondex was a peer-to-peer payment system. You could swap value amongst individuals without a bank being in between. All you needed was a card per person and a transaction device that basically, you didn't need a bank, but you needed this electronic device that took value from one card to another card. So you could do that via the phone, you could do that via physical in-person they call them transactor devices. So they were built into phones, they were built into eventually computers, they were built into like small calculator type early smartphone type devices. So Christopher was involved with that. So I got involved for about a year and a half, 2 years in meeting people like AT&T, MasterCard, Visa, all the big names that were at that time involved with Mondex. But the writing was on the wall. They were doing the what did they call it? So they had a number of there's a word for it, experimental sites. So one was in the UK in Swindon, one was in Hong Kong, one was in Guelph in Ontario in Canada.
So these would be test markets?
Yeah, so in Guelph, so it's Guelph, there's a university city. In Swindon, it was a smallish new city, so they were deploying devices in retail shops and consumers. They did it for several years, but it was the time I decided to leave. I saw the writing on the wall, as it were. Things were not sort of moving ahead as I would have liked. For me, I was interested in how and when this device was going to go really mass market, and I didn't see it happening. It wasn't being, for whatever reason. Really, what happened was that the banks, who were one of the major shareholders of Mondex, in fact, actually it was bought out eventually by MasterCard, which was the banks. The banks own MasterCard. Basically, the banks killed it. Otherwise, they would, if you think about it, the telecom companies would actually become banks. And, who need bank? So it got basically killed.
In an age of extremely low interest rates, yes, who needs the banks, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, they still make, don't cry for them. They still make their money even with low interest rate.
Well, considering that the fees end up being higher than the interest that they pay you, I hope they're making money.
Well, they're still making record profit every year, but
of course,
year after years, right? Yeah,
I know.
Yeah. So we did that. But anyway, so we laid low for a couple of years, and then a year or two afterwards, I reached out to Christopher and reached out to my in-laws in Wong's and say, hey, look, something's happening in the technology field. People and companies were talking about the slim computer, i.e. the birth of cloud computing. So companies were talking about it. There weren't any real product out there, i.e., a $200 microcomputer that basically didn't have hard disks and so on. So I reached out to Christopher, and we assembled. Basically, Christopher assembled a hardware designer with some software capability in Cambridge. I became the conduit into the volume manufacturing eventually when it was going to happen. So we went down the road of contacting people like Oracle. Hey, what do you think about a product? And Oracle were up talking such a device, but unfortunately that didn't happen because the person that, I won't mention names, but the person that we recruited to design the hardware product suddenly stopped communicating with us. And we later learned that he sold the design to some companies and made millions from it. From having a the slim computer solution, which I think became a set-top box for this company. I don't know the details of who he sold it to and so on, but that really pissed me off. And so from there on, I basically stopped my engagement with, and so that was in the late 90s, I don't know, 97, 98, 99, something like that. And I went back to my fishing.
Also a hobby.
It fed the family. It fed the family. I always had salmon in my freezer.
As someone who comes from the Northwest of the United States, that hits right in the right spot. I mean,
right? Yes. Yes. King salmon. There's nothing like a king salmon on the barbie.
Oh, it's beautiful. Oh, smoked. I used to smoke my own salmon. Smoked. Oh, I miss it so much.
Dog salmon? You smoke?
Sockeye.
Sockeye. Okay.
Yeah.
Sockeye. I used to cure sashimi.
Yeah, I used to cure it in a 50% sugar and 50% salt. Overnight, and then put it in the nice little smoker with a little bit of mesquite on it. Oh, yummy.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Great for sandwiches.
Okay, so you go back to fishing, but technology doesn't let you go. There's an issue in technology that still keeps you engaged. And
interested,
interested. So at some point you leave Canada again, because you're not in Canada right now. No. So when do you head back to Hong Kong?
Well, I mean, over the years I've never lived in Hong Kong until actually 2003. So 2003 was the year that my first grandson was born in Hong Kong. That was the year of SARS. So at the tail end of SARS, in I think it was the end of August, early September, I was diagnosed with melanoma, cancer of the face,
skin,
of the skin on my face, and so I decided to have the operation in Hong Kong because the family knew a lot of the best doctors, and if I was to do it in Canada, I would have to wait 2 or 3 months just to get a visit, an appointment with a specialist, which is what happened. So I contacted the family and they said, hey, look, so this is on a Wednesday when I was diagnosed. Contacted the family to say, hey, look, why don't you come immediately? And, so that was on a Wednesday. I booked a flight for Saturday. I was in Hong Kong on Sunday, visited oncologist on Monday, and history. So eventually I had my operation in Hong Kong and decided, number one, family was in Hong Kong. So decided we'd sell up from Vancouver eventually and live more or less permanently in Hong Kong. But we didn't sell up completely. We ended up selling the house and then buying an apartment in Vancouver. But eventually, 5-6 years ago, even that got sold, and basic ties in Vancouver severed. None of my kids wanted to live in Vancouver. They all live in London now. So, and I'm still here, unfortunately. My son's, so I moved in Hong Kong because my first grandson was here. Subsequent second grandson came along, but about 10, 12 years ago, he decided to move back to England. So, so I got basically stranded in Hong Kong.
Is your son still working in the family business, or
no?
So
none of my children went into the family business. For whatever reason, they didn't see it as an attractive option for them. In terms of the other family members, there's only one granddaughter. One granddaughter. I'm just thinking that straight through. One granddaughter out of, I don't know, 18, 19, whatever,
wow.
Joined the family business. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Now, so you're there now. Are you still consulting on any projects or any manufacturing or technology development projects at this point?
I've never been a consultant per se. That's not what drives me. I am looking at a technology application for a project that I have in mind for our charity, and that will involve education. Environmental. So, the things that I'm very interested in at this stage of life. So technology, application of technology within the environmental landscape. So that's where I'm at the moment. Yeah.
And now you've dropped the key phrase, the charity. So tell us about that.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. So I don't know some 14 years ago, I created a environmental charity that was, I don't know, naively think that we could change the world. And so, I guess, my vision has never changed. My vision was always how do we empower people, especially young people? How can we empower them to be part of the solution? So the journey I've taken over the past 14 years, if I analyze all the missteps and so on, at the end of the day, it's still about empowerment. So we then eventually, we were planting trees in China and doing design challenge competition in universities, which eventually led us to do environmental education workshops for primary schools and secondary schools. But we're now in a transition stage where, the realization that knowledge per se about the environmental issues, especially in a place like Hong Kong, is not necessarily an empowerment thing at all. Empowerment comes from really about self-confidence and building up the creativeness and self-confidence of young people, not just young people, actually, older, adults, in terms of our beliefs in being able to do something to buck buck the trend, as it were. We all know, 80%, 90% of the population on this planet know that we're in shit states, but what percentage of people do anything? It's only about 10, 15%, maybe 20%. The rest of the people, yeah, they know, but what can I do? Is the problem. So yeah. So looking at that, and how can we do something within the environmental arena that impacts that empowerment within individuals is and I don't, I'm looking at it from an intellectual perspective. I'm not an intellect at all. I'm about, let's do something, right? Rather than thinking about something, talking about something, and go in talking about more about something. My thought pattern is about, what can we do? What can we physically do that has an impact? And that's the journey that I'm on at this moment in time. Yeah.
Now, since you've been working on this project for 14 years, and we do have we've gone through a couple of crises. I mean, you came to Hong Kong right at the end of SARS. We've had COVID. We have an economic downturn. We have a transition right now worldwide, a shift of where manufacturing is happening, and an overall issue with younger people and unemployment, which is pretty much worldwide.
Yeah.
Have you seen the task of empowering people get easier or harder given that change? Has that changed, or is it basically still the same difficulty?
Yeah, I think this difficulty is there, but there are, for me, I'm an eternal optimist. People say I'm an eternal. Sorry, let me get rid of this call. They're trying to sell me something, and gotten rid of. I'm an eternal optimist, but I look at life as opportunities. What opportunities can we create from an understanding of a problem? So I look at things on a big picture level. Unfortunately, I'm not a micro level person. I'm a macro. So to answer your question, I think it's still a huge problem, but I believe that the tools are there to make it easier. But the problem is that I'm an old fart, and the gap of understanding technology, especially the use of computers and AI and social media. I know that it's a tool, but I don't, I'm not adept at using it. But I believe that at the moment, social media is basically a tool for bad. It's not. It's a tool that's there, and the people who are able to harness it at this moment in time, the bad guys are winning, unfortunately.
Oh yeah.
i.e. politically, environmentally, socially, they're winning. But their use of social media as a tool shows how powerful social media can be. So my stage is at this moment in time is, unfortunately, I don't have a huge amount of resources to plow into this, but this is where I'm trying to get to in the next year or two, to build up that resources that we can harness the social media as a tool to create that change. So I'm optimistic it can be done, but it's how do we use the tool of social media, which is such a powerful tool. How do we use it? Getting the resources to use it. the young people that have an understanding of it, to come on side and create a team. I'm not talking about hundreds of people. Initially, a handful of people with reasonable, decent skills can do it. It can be done. So that's where I'm in the early stage of trying to create that with our new social enterprise, where creating revenue streams to be able to afford that. Yeah.
And that, what can I say? In a world that, well, as we're doing this mid-2024, there are many, many dark clouds on the horizon on many, many fronts. Yes, trying to stay positive is not easy, unfortunately.
I'm not political, but I believe in right and wrong. So don't want to say any more than that.
Yes.
There is a difference between right and wrong. There's a difference between, the laws and the rules of law is not necessarily right. There is a definite difference between right and wrong. I will always stand up for right, regardless of religion or color or political views or whatever. Yeah.
Understand. Now, one final question. I ask this of all my interview subjects. Mm-hmm. Looking back at your career, and your many different endeavors, what was one trend, either market, technology development, social use of technology, that you thought was going to be huge that ended up going nowhere? And what was one where it became huge and you just didn't see it coming?
So if you were to relive Mondex now, because it shows that, with all the new payment systems now going on now, really the banks are still involved. But if Mondex was to happen now, there would be a good chance that the banks would not come out necessarily the winners and killed it, because even more so, the application of peer-to-peer payment, cashless society, it's crying out for a product like that. We almost have it, but it's still, at the end of the day, the banks are still involved. But in those days, things like micropayment consideration, the banks were saying, how can we make money from a transfer of $1 or £1 or 50p or 50 cents. But now, you can go into a shop and you buy something for 50 cents and the retailer don't give a shit, right? He'll take your 50 cents is just as good as $50.
Yeah, that's true.
So but as an individual, as it were, the small player, Christopher, with his company and my contribution, could we have moved the cable, move the hands of the clock? No, probably not. As a small player, I don't know. Maybe that slim computer was, because if you look at now what's happening now with cloud computers, if it would stay there, but it's. At the end of the day, what came out of Acorn, you've got a company called ARM Holding, one of the biggest semiconductor design houses in the world, and it's still the number one. Right. It's worth, I don't know what it is worth now, 40 billion, and that came out of Acorn, and it's still going.
Of all the microcomputer, home computer companies of the 80s, they're the only ones still standing, really. Now they mutated, they changed to adapt, but they're still standing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the things about any business is about evolution. I mean, it's like the dinosaur, right? You either evolve and become birds or whatever, and you evolve. But unfortunately, Acorn was not able to evolve. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, Raymond, thank you so very much for your time. Thank you for your insights. Is there anything I should have asked that I didn't?
I can't think of anything, Carl.
Perfect. Then thank you very much, and best of luck with the charity going forward and your endeavors to empower those who will hopefully be able to make the change.
Well, it's my pleasure, and the fight goes on. Thank you, Carl.
I hope you've enjoyed another Video Game Newsroom Time Machine interview. You can leave us comments on Twitter, Instagram, and if you like what we're doing here, drop us a couple of bucks on Patreon. All the links are in the description below.